Chapter 4th, Part 2 of Elsie Dinsmore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Elsie Dinsmore by Martha Finley. Chapter 4th, Part 2. The two little girls were seated together at the table, Elsie's papa being on her other side. "How nice these muffins are! Don't you like them, Elsie?" asked Lucy, as she helped herself to a third or fourth. "Yes, very much," said Elsie cheerfully. "Then what are you eating that cold bread for? And you haven't got any butter, either. Poppy, why don't you hand Miss Elsie the butter?" "No, Lucy, I mustn't have it. Papa does not allow me to eat hot cakes or butter," said Elsie, in the same cheerful tone in which she had spoken before. Lucy opened her eyes very wide and drew in a breath. "Well," she exclaimed, "if my papa should try that on me, I'd make such a fuss he'd have to let me eat just whatever I wanted." "Elsie knows better than to do that," said Mr. Dinsmore, who had overheard the conversation. "She would only get sent away from the table and punished for her naughtiness." "I wouldn't do it anyhow, papa," said Elsie, raising her eyes beseechingly to his face. "No, daughter, I don't believe you would," he replied in an unusually kind tone. Elsie's face flushed with pleasure. Several days passed away very pleasantly, Lucy sharing Elsie's studies in the morning, while Herbert remained with his mamma, and then in the afternoon all went walking or riding out together, unless the weather was too warm, when they spent the afternoon playing in the veranda on the shady side of the house, and took their ride or walk after the sun was down. Arthur and Walter paid little attention to Herbert, as his lameness prevented him from sharing in the activity sports, which they preferred, for they had never been taught to yield their wishes to others, and were consequently extremely selfish and overbearing. But Elsie was very kind, and did all in her power to interest and amuse him. One afternoon they all walked out together, attended by Jim; but Arthur and Walter, unwilling to accommodate their pace to Herbert's slow movements, were soon far in advance, Jim following close at their heels. "They're quite out of sight," said Herbert presently, "and I'm very tired. Let's sit down on this bank, girls. I want to try my new bow, and you may run and pick my arrows up for me." "Thank you, sir," said Lucy laughingly. "Elsie may do it if she likes, but as for me, I mean to take a nap. This nice soft grass will make an elegant couch." And throwing herself down, she soon was, or pretended to be, in a sound slumber, while Herbert, seating himself with his back against a tree, amused himself with shooting his arrows here and there, Elsie running for them and bringing them to him, until she was quite heated and out of breath. "Now I must rest a little, Herbert," she said at length, sitting down beside him. "Shall I tell you a story?" "Oh, yes, do. I like your stories, and I don't mind leaving off shooting until you're done," said he, laying down his bow. Elsie's story lasted about 10 minutes, and when she had finished, Herbert took up his bow again, saying, "I guess you're rested now, Elsie," and sent an arrow over into the meadow. "There, just see how far I sent that. Do run and bring it to me, Elsie," he cried, "and let me see if I can hit the tree next time. I've just but missed." "I'm tired, Herbert, but I'll run and bring it to you this once," replied Elsie, forgetting entirely her father's prohibition. "But then you must try and wait until Jim comes back before you shoot any more." So saying, she darted away, and came back in a moment with the arrow in her hand. But a sudden recollection had come over her just as she left the meadow, and throwing down the arrow at the boy's feet, she exclaimed in an agitated tone, "Oh, Herbert, I must go home just as quickly as I can. I had forgotten. Oh, how could I forget? Oh, what will papa say?" "What's the matter?" asked Herbert in alarm. "Never mind," said Elsie, sobbing. "There are the boys coming. They'll take care of you. I must go home. Goodbye." As she ran quickly up the road, Herbert followed her retreating form with wondering eyes. Elsie sped onward, crying bitterly as she went. "Where's papa?" she inquired of a servant whom she met in the avenue. "Dunno, Miss Elsie, but I reckon Massa Horace am in de house, 'cause his horse am in the stable." Elsie hardly waited for the answer, but hurrying into the house, she went from room to room, looking and asking in vain for her father. He was not in the drawing room, or the library, or his own apartments. She had just come out of this, and meeting a chamber maid in the hall, she exclaimed, "Oh, Fanny, where's papa? Can't you tell me, for I must see him?" "Here I am, Elsie. What do you want with me?" called out her father's voice from the veranda, where she had neglected to look. "What do you want?" he repeated, as his little girl appeared before him with her flushed and tearful face. Elsie moved slowly toward him, with a timid air and downcast eyes. "I wanted to tell you something, papa," she said in a low, tremulous tone. "Well, I'm listening," said he, taking hold of her hand and drawing her to his side. "What is it? Are you sick or hurt?" "No, papa, not either, but "Oh, papa, I've been a very naughty girl," she exclaimed, bursting into tears and sobbing violently. "I disobeyed you, papa. I've been in the meadow." "Is it possible? Would you dare do so when I so positively forbade it only the other day?" said he in his sternest tone, while a dark frown gathered over his brow. "Elsie, I shall have to punish you." "I did not intend to disobey you, papa," she sobbed. "I quite forgot that you had forbidden me to go there." "That is no excuse, no excuse at all," said he severely. "You must remember my commands, and if your memory is so poor, I shall find means to strengthen it." He paused a moment, still looking sternly at the little trembling, sobbing girl at his side, then asked, "What were you doing in the meadow? Tell me the whole story, that I may understand just how severely I ought to punish you." Elsie gave him all the particulars, and when upon questioning her closely, he perceived how entirely voluntary her confession had been, his tone and manner became less stern, and he said quite mildly, "Well, Elsie, I shall not be very severe with you this time, as you seem to be very penitent, and have made so full and frank a confession. But beware how you disobey me again, for you will not escape so easily another time, and remember I will not take forgetfulness as any excuse. Go now to Aunt Chloe, and tell her that she is to put you to bed immediately." "It's only in the middle of the afternoon, papa," said Elsie, deprecatingly. "If it were much earlier, Elsie, it would make no difference. You must go at once to your bed and stay there until tomorrow morning." "What will Lucy and Herbert think when they come in and can't find me, papa?" she said, weeping afresh. "You should have thought of that before you disobeyed me," he answered very gravely. "If you are hungry," he added, "you may ask Chloe to get you a slice of bread or a cracker for your supper, but you can have nothing else." Elsie lingered, looking timidly up into his face, and thought wanting to say something, but afraid to venture. "Speak, Elsie, if you have something more to say," he said, encouragingly. "Dear papa, I am so sorry I have been so naughty," she murmured, leaning her head against the arm of his chair, while the tears rolled fast down her cheeks. "Won't you please forgive me, papa? It seems to me I can't go to sleep tonight if you are angry with me." He seemed quite touched by her penitence. "Yes, Elsie," he said, "I do forgive you. I am not at all angry with you now, and you may go to sleep in peace. Good night, my little daughter," and he bent down and pressed his lips against her brow. Elsie held up her face for another, and he kissed her on the lips. "Good night, dear papa," she said. "I hope I shall never be a naughty girl again," and she went to her room, made almost happy by that kiss of forgiveness. Elsie was up quite early the next morning, and had learned all her lessons before breakfast. As she came down the stairs, she saw through the open door her papa standing with some of the men servants, apparently gazing at some object lying on the ground. She ran out and stood on the steps of the portico, looking at them and wondering what they were doing. Presently her father turned round, and seeing her, held out his hand, calling, "Come here, Elsie." She sprang quickly down the steps, and running to him, put her hand in his, saying, "Good morning, papa." "Good morning, daughter," he said. "I have something to show you." And leading her forward a few paces, he pointed to a large rattlesnake lying there. "Oh, papa!" she cried, starting back and clinging to him. "It will not hurt you now," he said. "It's dead. The men killed it this morning in the meadow. Do you see now why I forbade you to go there?" "Oh, papa!" she murmured in a low tone of deep feeling, and laying her cheek affectionately against his head, "I might have lost my life by my disobedience. How good God was to take care of me! Oh, I hope I shall never be so naughty again." "I hope not," said he gravely, but not unkindly. "And I hope that you will always, after this, believe that your father has some good reason for his commands, even though he may not always choose to explain it to you." "Yes, papa, I think I will," she answered humbly. The breakfast bell had rung, and he now led her in and seated her at the table. Lucy Carrington looked curiously at her, and soon took an opportunity to whisper, "Where were you last night, Elsie? I couldn't find you, and your papa wouldn't say what had become of you, though I'm quite sure he knew." "I'll tell you after breakfast," replied Elsie, blushing deeply. Lucy waited rather impatiently until all had risen from the table, and then putting her arm around Elsie's waist, he drew her out on the veranda, saying, "Now, Elsie, tell me. You know you promised." "I was in bed," replied Elsie, dropping her eyes, while the color mounted to her very hair. "In bed! Before 5 o'clock!" exclaimed Lucy, in a tone of astonishment. "Why, what was that for?" "Papa sent me," replied Elsie, with an effort. "I had been naughty, and disobeyed him." "Why, how strange! Do tell me what you had done," exclaimed Lucy, with a face full of curiosity. "Papa had forbidden me to go into the meadow. I forgot all about it, and ran in there to get Herbert's arrow for him," replied Elsie, looking very much ashamed. Was that all? Why, my papa wouldn't have punished me for that," said Lucy. "He might have scolded me a little if I'd done it on purpose, but if I had told him I had forgotten, he would only said, 'You must remember better next time.'" "Papa says that forgetfulness is no excuse; that I am to remember his commands, and if I forget he will have to punish me to make me remember better next time," said Elsie. "He must be very strict indeed. I'm glad he's not my papa," replied Lucy, in a tone of great satisfaction. "Come, little girls, make haste and get ready; we are to start in half an hour," said Adelaide Dinsmore, calling them from the hall door. The whole family, old and young, including visitors, were on that day to go to a picnic up on the river, taking their dinner along, and spending the day in the woods. They had been planning this excursion for several days, and the children especially had been looking forward to it with a great deal of pleasure. "Am I to go, Aunt Adelaide? Did papa say so?" asked Elsie anxiously, as she and Lucy hastened to obey the summons. "I presume you are to go, of course, Elsie. We have been discussing the matter for the last 3 days, anyways, taking it for granted that you were to make one of the party, and he's never said you should not," replied Adelaide good naturedly. "So make haste, or you will be too late. But here comes your papa now," she added, as the library door opened and Mr. Dinsmore stepped out in his hall where they were standing. "Horace, Elsie is to go, of course." "I do not see the 'of course,' Adelaide," said he dryly. "No, Elsie is not to go. She must stay at home and attend to her lessons as usual." A look of keen disappointment came over Elsie's face, but she turned away without a word and went upstairs, while Lucy, casting a look of wrathful indignation at Mr. Dinsmore, ran after her, and following her into the room, she put her arm around her neck, saying, "Never mind, Elsie, it's too bad. I wouldn't bear it. I'd go in spite of him." "No, no, Lucy, I must obey my father. God says so; and besides, I couldn't do that, even if I wanted to, for papa is stronger than I am, and would punish me severely if I were to attempt such a thing," replied Elsie hastily, brushing away a tear that would come into her eye. "Then I'd coax him," said Lucy. "Come, I'll go with you, and we'll both try." "No," replied Elsie, with a hopeless shake of the head. "I have found out already that my papa never breaks his word, and nothing could induce him to let me go, now that he has once said I should not. But you'll have to leave me, Lucy, or you'll be too late." "Good bye, then," said Lucy, turning to go; "but I think it is a great shame, and I shan't half enjoy myself without you." "Well, now, Horace, I think you might let the child go," was Adelaide's somewhat indignant rejoinder to her brother, as the two little girls disappeared. "I can't conceive what reason you have for keeping her at home, and she looks so terribly disappointed. Indeed, Horace, I am sometimes half inclined to think that you take pleasure in thwarting that child." "You had better call me a tyrant at once, Adelaide," said he angrily, and turning very red; "but I must beg to be permitted to manage my own child in my own way, and I cannot see that I am under any obligation to give my reasons either to you or to any one else." "Well, if you do not intend to let her go, I think you might have said so at first, and not let the poor little child build up her hopes upon it, only to be disappointed. I must say I think it was very cruel." "Until this morning, Adelaide," he replied, "I did intend to let her go, for I expected myself to go; but I find that I shall not be able to do so, as I must meet a gentleman on business, and as I know that accidents frequently occur on such pleasure parties, I don't feel willing to let Elsie go, unless I could be there myself to take care of her. Whether you believe it or not, it is really regard for my child's safety, and not cruelty, that leads me to refuse her this gratification." "You are full of notions about that child, Horace," Adelaide said impatiently. "I am sure some of the rest of us could take care of her." "No. In case of accident, you would all have enough to do to take care of yourselves, and I shall not think of trusting Elsie in the company, since I cannot be there myself," he answered decidedly; and Adelaide, seeing that he was not to be moved from his determination, gave up the attempt, and left the room to prepare for her ride. It was a great disappointment to Elsie, and for a few moments her heart rose up in rebellion against her father. She tried to put away the feelings, but it would come back, for she could not imagine any reason for his refusal to let her go, excepting the disobedience of the day before, and it seemed hard and unjust to punish her twice for the same fault, especially as he would have known nothing about it but for her own frank and voluntary confession. It was a great pity she had not heard the reasons he gave her Aunt Adelaide, for then she would have been quite submissive and content. It is indeed true that she ought to have been as well, but our little Elsie, though sincerely desirous to do right, was not yet perfect, and had already strangely forgotten the lesson of the morning. She watched from the veranda the departure of the pleasure seekers, all apparently in their gayest spirits. She was surprised to see that her father was not with them, and half reconciled her to staying at home, although she hardly expected to see much of him; but there was something pleasant in the thought that he wanted her at home because he was to be there himself. It looked as though he really had some affection for her; even a selfish love was better than none. I do not mean that these words were Elsie's thoughts. No, she never would have dreamed of calling her father selfish; but the undefined feeling was there, as she watched him hand the ladies into the carriage, and then turned and re entered the house as they drove off. But Miss Day's bell rang, and Elsie gathered up her books and hastened to the schoolroom. Her patience and endurance were sorely tried that morning, for Miss Day was in an exceedingly bad humor, and being greatly mortified and also highly indignant that she had not been invited to make one of the picnic party. And Elsie had never found her more unreasonable and difficult to please, and her incessant fault-finding and scolding were almost more than the little girl could bear, in addition to her own sad disappointment. But at last the morning, which had seldom seemed so long, was over, and Elsie dismissed from the schoolroom for the day. At dinner, instead of the usual large party, there was only her father and the gentleman with whom he was transacting business, Miss Day, and herself. The gentleman was not one of those who cared to notice children, but continued to discuss business and politics with Mr. Dinsmore, without seeming to be at least aware of the presence of the little girl, who sat in perfect silence, eating whatever her father saw fit to put on her plate; and Elsie was very glad indeed when at length Miss Day rose to leave the table, and her papa told her she might go. He called her back, though, before she had gone across the room, to say that he had intended to ride with her that afternoon, but found he should not be able to do so, and she must take Jim for a protector, as he did not wish her to either miss her ride or go entirely alone. He spoke very kindly, Elsie thought, with remorse of her rebellious feelings of the morning, and, had she been alone with her father, would certainly have confessed them, expressing her sorrow and asking forgiveness; but she could not do so before a third person, more especially a stranger, and merely saying, "Yes, papa, I will," she turned away and left the room. Jim was bringing up her horse as she passed the open door, and she hastened upstairs to prepare for her ride. "Oh, mammy!" she suddenly exclaimed, as Chloe was trying on her hat, "is Pomp going to the city to-day?" "Yes, darlin', he's gwine start directly," said Chloe, arranging her nursling's curls to better advantage, and finishing her work with a fond caress. "Oh, then, mammy, take some money out of my purse, and tell him to buy me a pound of the very nicest candy he can find," said the little girl eagerly. "I haven't had any for a long time, and I feel hungry for it to-day. When they had bought it for the picnic, it looked so good, but you know I didn't get any of it." The picnic party returned just before tea time, and Lucy Carrington rushed into Elsie's room, eager to tell her of what a delightful day they had had. She gave a very long, glowing account of their sports and entertainment, interrupting herself every now and then to lament over Elsie's absence, assuring her again and again that it had only been a drawback upon her own pleasure, and that she thought Elsie's papa was very unkind indeed to refuse her permission to go. As Elsie listened, the morning's feelings of vexation and disappointment returned in full force, and though she said nothing, she allowed her friend to accuse her father of cruelty and injustice without offering any remonstrance. In the midst of their talk the tea bell rang, and they hurried down to take their places at the table, where Lucy went on with her narrative, though in a rather subdued tone, Elsie now and then asking a question, until Mr. Dinsmore turned to his daughter, saying in a stern way, "Be quiet, Elsie, you are talking entirely too much for a child of your age. Don't let me hear you speak again until you've left the table." Elsie's face flushed, and her eyes fell up under the rebuke, and during the rest of the meal not a sound escaped her lips. "Come, Elsie, let us go into the garden and finish our talk," said Lucy, putting her arm affectionately around her friend's waist, as they left the table. "Your papa can't hear us there, and we'll have a good time." "Papa only stopped us because we were talking too much at the table," said Elsie apologetically. "I'm sure he is willing you should tell me all about what a nice time you had. But, Lucy," she added, lowering her voice, "please don't say again that you think my papa was unkind to keep me at home today. I'm sure he knows best, and I ought not to listen to a word of that kind about him." "Oh, well, never mind, I won't talk so any more," said Lucy good naturedly, as they skipped down the walk together. "But I do think he's cross, and I wish you were my sister, that you might have my good, kind papa for yours too," she added, drawing her arm more closely about her friend's waist. "Thank you, Lucy," said Elsie with a little sigh. "I would like you to be my sister, but indeed I would not like to give up my own dear papa, for I love him, oh, so much." "Why, how funny, when he's so cross to you!" exclaimed Lucy laughingly. Elsie put her hand over her friend's mouth, and Lucy pushed it away, saying, "Excuse me, I forgot, but I'll try not to say it again." End of chapter 4, part 2.